On this episode of the Live Faith First podcast, I get to hang out with Chris and Julie Bennett. Now, they're the authors of the book called Fighting for Family, and it's their journey of faith and risk and persevering through adversity and victory on the other side in the midst of keeping friends and family and community around you. Because the truth is community can get messy, but community is also necessary to our thriving. So check out this episode of the Live Faith First podcast. Welcome to the Live Faith First podcast. I'm Elliot Sands, and I'm with Chris and Julie Bennett, and they have served as pastors in Oklahoma, and they're currently serving at a church in California. They founded a media production company and are the authors of the book Fight for Family. So Chris, Julie, thank you for joining the podcast today.
Thanks. It's such an honor to be on.
I already feel like we've known you forever, and we just talked for a few minutes. You have a way with people.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited. Yes, the last 5 to 10 minutes have been really fun and connecting there. But I love your story. I love your story, and it's full of vulnerability. It's full of challenges. And I think in our day and age, it's important that we live into that. Not to bring elections totally into this, but you probably heard the stat. 2016, 1 in 6 people broke a close relationship with a friend or a family member around the election. And it's easier to break relationship than it is to keep relationship. So, which we're going to dive into today. But before we get there, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story. Where were you guys born and raised? Tell us about your upbringing. How'd you get where you are today?
Yeah. I'm Oklahoma girl. He's from Texas. His best friend from high school went to Baylor University, said, you got to meet this boy. You're going to want to marry him. I was at the University of Oklahoma at the time. And you fast forward now it's been 25 years since we first met. And here we are. So 4 kids later. And like you said, we pastored a church in Oklahoma for 10 years, left everything to come to LA because that's what you normally do. That's very normal. You leave Oklahoma and you say, let's take an adventure and move to Los Angeles. So we did with our 4 kids and our 8 suitcases, thinking that we were walking into this adventurous time where we were going to create media around family, transition to this new city. We were going to live off the sale of our house and rest for a little bit. And that turned into a much different story. I'll let you.
Yeah, so we moved in with a family. I mean, we landed literally in LA without a home, without a job, without income. Just God had led us, and we were on a crazy faith journey. And so we moved in with a family that we met through mutual friends. The house fell through. Our 2 weeks with them turned into 9 weeks. We picked a move out date just so that we didn't want to overstay our welcome. And the week before, Julie got diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. And so we found ourselves in one of those moments where we had a very clear sense that God had called us. And then we had a moment of decision. And we really felt invited that the Lord said, if you stay, I'll walk with you. And we did. And we ended up moving 20 times over the next 6 months, all over LA County with our 4 kids while she's battling breast cancer. I wouldn't recommend it unless you have a very clear call to do so. But finally,
don't try this at home is what we like to say.
Right.
Yeah, landed in an area called Burbank, moved in, kind of got settled. And then she was in remission for a year. Cancer came back during COVID, which is right around the time we end up writing this book start writing this book called Fighting for Family.
Yeah. So.
Wow. All right. We will dig into that journey. I just want to recap here. So y'all were, born and raised in Oklahoma, Texas.
Yeah.
Pastored a church in Oklahoma, and God just put this burden call on y'all to move out to California. Now, before we get into the picture, the beautiful picture journey, and then what the journey turned out to, and it's still a beautiful picture at the end of that, I'm sure. But talk about risk, like just I'm a planner. So for me, the idea of moving anywhere without a job or, oh, hey, 2 weeks and living on a couch, but and 4 kids, talk a little bit about that process and why that was a risk that you felt clear this was the one we're taking.
I would say as a core value, we've always had a value for, hey, we're going to be risk takers. We're not going to get comfortable. We're not going to settle. And I used to always tell our church in Oklahoma this tagline that, again, sounds really good in a sermon until you have to walk it out. And just used to say, if God invites you into something or asks you to do something, just say yes before you know how. And it's a longer story of how God spoke to us about moving to LA, but we knew it was him. And then we said, okay, well, if we wait for everything to line up, it actually oftentimes removes faith from the element. The essence of faith is there is a risk involved. Now, the part that's not risky is who God is, his character. He's going to come through. He's going to take care of us. But we made the decision as a family, even though our kids were young, we brought them into that process. But it was so loud. It was so clear that we just knew there's never going to be a perfect time. So we stepped out and we went for it. And with all the adversity, I will just say our story has been, man, God, here's what I would say. Somebody told me years ago, everybody wants to see a miracle. Nobody wants to be in a position to need one. And so if you want to see the miracles of the Bible, you kind of have to put yourself into the situation where it's only possible with him.
Yeah.
That's good.
Not the cancer miracles, not those.
No.
That's not what we mean. No. Yeah. But, it was one of those, again, the story's too long, but I really think, if people listening want to find themselves in our story, like we don't have time for the incredible stories of how God spoke to us, what was leading up, as Chris mentioned. But my son had an opportunity to come to an art school here. He was 14 at the time. You had to be 18. And so he needed an adult with him. So I was like, I'll go to Pasadena. Great. I'll sign up. And while I was there, I was like, wait a second. Is paying attention to the signs in life. When we are hungry, we're made for adventure and risk. And that doesn't mean that people need to do what we do. Of course not. There's not a formula. Risking might be homeschooling your kids. Risking may be putting your kids in public school. Right? Risk could mean lots of different things for us. Yeah. Ours was very extreme, and we are aware of that. But there were little signs that God gave us where I was like, wait a second, I think there's something here. This is what makes me come alive here. Like, oh, okay, well, we've never moved there. We're pastoring a church. We're never going to leave Oklahoma, which is what we said. Planting churches all over. And then another sign happened. Okay. And so we just started to pay attention, and God is incredible because he's such a good friend, right? He's such a good friend that he starts to draw the lines and weave things together. And that's what our yes was, is that, again, we could spend 2 hours telling you, then this happened. And then this person happened to call. This person had a dream. Yeah, read the book. But it was, when we actually, read the book. But so that was a big part of our yes was, it wasn't just well, let's just do this crazy thing. Yeah. Yes. Most people thought we had lost our minds. And we thought, but we'll have this money to sit, we're going to rest. And then that switched. But when all the crud hit the fan and it's like, hey, everyone here in Oklahoma and Texas that thought you were crazy, now we really think you're crazy. Now they backed out. You still own your home. You don't have the money. And you have stage 3 cancer, living out of 8 suitcases because your stuff's packed in storage in Texas. So come back. Yeah. And the Lord was like, so, those moments in our lives were we missed God. People were right. All of those things. And you have to stop in our risking and in our adventuring with God, kind of like Abraham did, to go, man, there's fireworks.
That's good.
Right?
I didn't know Riverside did that, but yes, apparently for those of you watching on YouTube, we just I don't know if I can make that happen. I know the thumbs up works on, I don't know.
Okay. Some of you might be listening, I guess, but
there were fireworks in our background. Maybe made a really good point.
I guess so. Maybe that was time to move on. But anyway, needless to say, I don't know what I was saying now. So we'll transition.
That is so good. And besides the fireworks, that was fire, by the way. Yes, when you get into it and there is adversity, right? When you're like, okay, God made it clear.
Right.
And now there's adversity. Does that mean I missed God's word? Does that mean I misheard him? And I love it when God feels so clear that you're like, I can't go back. Now, not to the level y'all did, but first year of marriage, my wife and I went on a mission trip to Kosovo and had to raise $4,000 or $5,000, which at the beginning of marriage for us was like, oh, that's not coming out of our paycheck. That's asking people. And I remember getting a $1,000 donation from somebody. And my wife and I just looked at each other and like, God wants us to go serve there. And that helped because, as you know, anytime you're going out to serve God, there will be adversity, whatever that looked like. And it definitely kicked up within, amount of time before we went. And just to have that to hold on to.
Yeah.
And that's not picking up your family, moving halfway across the country with 8 suitcases. But it's that, I love it when God gives us enough that we just like, okay, I'm sure what he told us was right.
Well, there's a passage. So no, sorry, you keep on.
No, please continue. Go.
I think Psalm 105, I think verse 3, but it says, until the word of the Lord came to pass in Joseph's life, the word tested Joseph. And, there's the test of life, which is life's just hard. There's things that we can do that make life harder than it needed to be. But I've also found that God will give you a word, a promise. He'll say, I need you to take me at my word. And then the word will actually test us. And then that's where we actually believe, we discover pretty quickly what we believe about God and what we don't believe, where the cracks in the foundation. It's not ever to shame us. It just reveals stuff. So I think that's what we found is we had this word from God. It got tested again and again. And all that we could go back was not our circumstances, not our provision, not our security, because we had none of it. And just go back and say, okay, Lord, we're taking you at your word. That's all we have. And Jesus is like, man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So I would say anybody listening too, that feels like I stepped out, God said this. I've seen people that have like given up and then blamed God for not showing up. And I think what I've found is when it says, if we don't give up in due season, we will reap a harvest if we don't give up. And I think people are closer than they think. That might be another message.
And sometimes giving up doesn't mean that, it means adjusting. Sometimes not giving up means adjusting our plan or different things like that. And, in Joshua 4, it talks about the memorial stones. So when that's kind of where it left off before the fireworks went off, is that we had to answer that question. I need to start chemo in 2 weeks. We now have to put our home in Oklahoma back on the market. And we have a little bit overstayed our welcome to this kind family who 2 weeks turned into 9 weeks. And we're moving out. And now we found out that we have cancer. And it was like, we may not know how this outcome turns out. God doesn't guarantee us that. He guarantees that he'll never leave us and forsake us. And so those memorial stones of our life, right? The Joshua 4, it talks about, in the Old Testament, why did they put the 12 stones? It's because it's easy to forget when it gets hard. Yeah. It's easy to forget when, speaking of the family is messy, we've gotten hurt, this happens. It's hard when you diagnose with cancer, but God has proven faithful. I have to remember who he is. Not like, well, you promised me that this is going to turn out well. He's like, my promise is I will not leave your side and I will not let this hard be wasted. And that is what we experienced. And we chose to stay and we saw God come through.
Yeah. That's so good. That's so good. I love that. Yeah, my Bible reading plan has me in Leviticus right now. So you can imagine the blessings of reading through Leviticus. If you don't read the Bible regularly, you should not start there.
Don't give the new believer, hey, start in Leviticus.
If you need a word from God, don't just
don't go there. So I forget what day it was. I'm like, I need something other than Leviticus today. So I went to Philippians 4 and Paul starts talking about, I've learned the secret to contentment. Right. And then he talks through good and bad and difficult and trouble. And he says, I dislike the word secret in relation to Christianity because it's like, I don't feel like there's a secret to it. It's just all in the Bible. Let's just go read it. It's not a secret. There's not a key that you need. It's not something, but Paul actually used that word secret. Yeah. And he says, all these things I can do through Christ who strengthens me. And we love that verse because we use it like when we're going to run a marathon, right? Like it's at the back, it's our like, I can run 26 miles through Christ who strengthens me. Well, go for that. Like that is a good motivation, but out of context. But that idea that how do we journey through, right, tragedies, a second diagnosis of cancer, coming out and things not playing out the way that we pictured them in our mind, and to realize just exactly what you're saying, that it is through Christ who is with us. Because of him, God is with us through all of it. And just And I love, again, what you say about the memorial stone, because that's a thing you have to hold on to. Like God was faithful in that. He will be faithful in this. We work with a God who doesn't change on us. So I love it. All right. I'm going to move on to some other stuff you have in the book because I feel like we could keep talking about this for the next half hour. You guys do a fun job of telling stories and weaving in God's faithfulness and kids and parenting, and also like this great, like realism of life. Like it's not always roses. I will not ask you to retell the road rage story in the parking lot at
gotta go read it.
Target or wherever that was. That turned into crying and hugging. Like I don't know how that happens, but anyway, that's amazing.
Yeah, and you would have actually been there for that. I dumbed that down a little bit too.
So get the book, read the story. You will love it. You might cry too. But you talk a lot about just the messiness of life. And when you talk about perfectionism, that like speaks to me. Just family story last week. Wow. There was a donor who said, "Hey, I have a check. Can I drop it off at your house at 6:00 on a Wednesday?" I'm like, "Well, 6:00, that's dinner time." I'm like, "Hey, dude, and they're friends. Hey, come in and have dinner. Like, just, y'all just come over. We'll have dinner tonight." Now, I love having people over. Stresses my wife out, but she loves having people over too. It's the same story every time. Why are we doing this? Yes, let's do it. It's a great idea. And then it happens. And you're like 20 minutes before, why are we doing this today? And then afterward, it's always the same. Oh, that was so much fun. I'm so happy we have people over.
Yeah.
But we don't do it on the moment. Like, hey, at 8 a.m., we're inviting friends over for 6:00 dinner. So I did that last week. And my wife was totally fine with it. She was like, "Oh, let's do it. This is great." But our house was not perfectly put together. And she actually accepted like dog hair on the floor, right? Like, like what are they going to think when they come to our house and it's not perfect, right? And we had a lovely dinner. They have dogs. I don't know if they noticed the hair. Like I'm guessing they didn't notice the hair. So anyway, would you talk a little bit about messy perfectionism, like just like embracing kind of the messiness of life? And yet, we know that there's still a place for like, we got to get our stuff together. So would you guys talk about that a little bit?
Good. Yeah. Chapter 4 is called Excuse the Mess. And I can say for me, I mean, I tend to struggle more with the whole, I think I said in the book, like trying to keep at bay my control lady instincts, and that's for lots of different reasons. And we don't have time to talk about that on this podcast, but we have 3 commitments that are just really practical and basic for our family, specifically for me, helps me rein in those control and perfectionistic impulses. But I admit that I can't control everything. Number 2, I will be messy around others. And 3, I will let other people be complicated. And as we practice those in our like family unit, I mean, our kids are older now. 2 of them are now out of the house. As we've practiced those, it's allowed us in the moments of like, oh my gosh, this is not clean, or this is not, all of our stuff comes out when we're stressed or we're trying. I love your story that you shared. We were actually just on a podcast talking about this, and like being okay with the bathroom not being clean is really hard for me. Because I think someone's going to judge me, probably because I'm the person judging your bathroom. Let's just be real, right?
The fireworks about to go off again.
The fireworks are the fireworks are going off now. And so when I practice these, like going, wow, I'm going to allow myself, I'm going to admit that I can't control everything. I'm going to do these 3 little commitments that seem small. Because when I practice these commitments, it helps me to be vulnerable, and it helps me to go, oh, I'm actually, or he's so chill. Like, it's not a big deal that stuff's in the corner, but it is to me.
Yeah.
Well, it's because it's coming from my own issue. Again, we don't have time to break that down, but it's powerful when we can recognize it. We always say like awareness is the beginning of like being free from our mess. But I also say that being able to be okay with being a little messy in life brings a lot of freedom.
Yeah.
And I would just tag on to, I think from a Christian, even, pastoring a church where I think how do I say this? I mean, the church is messy because people are messy. Yeah. And I think why people have been so turned off from, quote, the church is because of some of the hypocrisy that they've seen is, hey, Jesus would get onto the religious leaders and saying, he coined the phrase, you don't practice what you preach. And I think there's a level of vulnerability as a leader. Now, should we live above reproach? That's not what I'm saying. But leading in vulnerability and humility to say, hey, we're all in process. And it creates a space for people to feel like, I don't have to come and perform. And the last thing the church should be is an environment where people feel like they have to come and perform, because that creates performance ultimately towards God. And if you think about the model that Jesus gave, which is he unapologetically, openly sat down with, quote, the sinners and outcasts of society, to the point of the religious people accusing him of being a friend of sinners, which to him was a compliment, and being a glutton and a drunkard. And, one scholar said, Jesus was killed because of who he ate with. And I just think that you want to talk about a messy table. You've got the outcasts of society. You've got, zealots next to tax collectors, people that were volatile towards each other and sharing a meal, which tells me it is possible when there's an environment of unconditional love and honor to bring people from opposite sides of the spectrum, whether that's politically, whatever, pick the dividing point of our culture and say, no, the table is a place. Jesus proves that to us because he said he didn't come for the healthy, he came for the sick. And so I think somehow we've got to find ways of saying, agreement is not a prerequisite for love. It isn't. So
that's good.
And, we've learned that control and performance never bring the validation that we long for. And it doesn't build family. Yeah. So, and again, we have to practice it here. We have to practice it around our table at home. So then we can practice it at the table with a stranger or at the table, or my group of women that I used to gather with in the middle of cancer, who all love Jesus, but we're talking politically different, what we thought on vaccinations, what we thought about masks, what we thought about what theology, but we were able to come to the table and bring sincere love, which the Bible says love must be sincere because it holds power. So when we're speaking of unity, all that you guys are doing it's about sincere love that brings change.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we don't have our truths we believe that we hold on to and all those things, but it is about that place at the table brings. So anyway,
it's good.
I think mess is a sign of freedom. I really do.
Yeah. And it's tough to overcome, and tough to just allow things to be. We will close the door to our daughter's room and be like,
yeah.
Look at that. Mess disappeared. Look at that. Look at that. Even though we know what's behind it. And our daughter's in college and she comes home and, the room explodes, and then she goes back to college, and then my wife and I, and, probably again showing, some dysfunction, we go clean the room and we get it perfect. Like, okay, now we got it our way. But I want to go back to something you said about the church and just that performance driven. And I think we forget, I grew up in the church. You guys obviously have been in the church a long time, but I think especially in places that are maybe not fully culturally Christian, like California, much of the West Coast, much of the East Coast, walking into a church, if you choose to do so, and you've never been there before, or it's your first or second time, the level of anxiety. I don't like walking into a new church. Okay, I don't know where the stuff is, and I've been doing church for a long time. I can pick it up pretty quick, but I dislike it. I want it to be the right level of friendly. I want it to be the right level of all of that. But my wife accepted Jesus in her 30s, and the first time we went to a church barbecue, she's like, they're not going to accept me. They're not going to like me. And we're probably going to have a Bible trivia game that I don't know any answers to. That's what she pictured happening there. And instead we sat at a table and met with some very nice people and had great conversation. But her picture in her mind was they're going to spot me as either a non-Christian or in that case, a new believer. And I can't live up to any of those expectations. And my life to this point has been, I'm imagining, very different from what their life has been. Even though once you get to meet people, you realize the complicated messiness of everybody's life, whether or not you've gone to church. So I think that's a good reminder for us, as we...
Well, I think if you think of the church as a house, it is the house of God. The church is the family of God. I mean, we can call it whatever we want. It was not an organization. It was never a building. It is the people of God. And so then I go, to your point of, if we've invited a guest over, guess what? We're going to have be thoughtful about what are they experiencing when they show up. We're going to have thought about what are we cooking for dinner. The house is going to be in order, and we want them to, it's not like they're going to knock on the door and we're going to wave them in. Oh, come on. No, we're going to be there waiting for them, greeting them. And I think I just felt very strongly the church is meant to be that type of place that we remove our judgments and the unnecessary barriers so that someone can come that is seeking and searching. And every Sunday I get up and I will say, hey, we never want to embarrass you, but if this is your first time with us on a Sunday, would you raise your hand? Our church all claps. And then I'll say, it took so much courage for you to show up here today. It is awkward and it is weird. And we feel so honored to have you in, and I don't say in our house, but that's what I'm thinking. So every Sunday, this is a no-brainer, but I've realized people find this, they've been surprised. I go outside and I'm on the walkway and I wait there every week as people come up to greet them because I want them to feel welcomed from the moment they show up. So anyway, all I'm saying is Jesus is the head of the church. So we're saying, well, what kind of church is he creating? Well, it's a family. What kind of family is it? And then try to create that culture so people can come in and not create unnecessary barriers.
Yeah, that's good.
You don't have to take your shoes off.
Yeah. And I mean, to avoid the mess is really not to love, at all. And it's taking that risk. It is risky, And so even if it's showing up at someone's table too, or, I wrote about in the hardest time of my life, showing up with a group of 14 women where I was like, I kind of had I described it as like my backpack of self-protection, not a literal backpack, but like in case I need to abort. I've been really hurt by the church. Now I'm in a new city. I've been diagnosed with cancer. And this group of women have invited me to come. And I'm like, 14, really? How does that work? But that's what God does in our heart. That's what God does in family. It's messy. It's hard. We can be misunderstood. We have our self-protection because we've been hurt a lot. And he's like, well, I'm going to now meet you with what you need that you maybe don't know you need. And I didn't know I needed to understand true sincerity like I did in those friendships. So that's how God doesn't waste our heart too. I'm not trying to switch topics here, but like in the mess, like, and I think clean can be boring too sometimes, right? Like that's part of the beauty of relationship. It's not reality. It feels good sometimes, but it's just not, human plus human equals human problems, right? That's just the world we live in.
Right.
So,
it is.
Anyway.
No, that's great. So in your book, you bring out a couple of principles. One is honor all, which we've just stumbled into. We've been talking about that, and then embrace vulnerability, be humble, make boundaries, forgive daily, and serve freely. And this is kind of how some principles you have around being with family, building community, and some of those things. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about building community. You came out to California not having much of a community around you. Then COVID happens. And that, kind of messed with all of our communities to some degree. I remember, what was it? Probably mid-May after we had been on lockdown, not having anybody over. I think my parents came over at one point, fully masked up, like everything. We're like, y'all can come in, it's okay. And then, but by the middle of May, we're like, this is we will have our crew. I'm not keeping my grandkids away. I'm not keeping our daughter away. Like y'all be respectful. Anyway, all that to say, that was a tough time for community.
Yeah.
Would you guys talk about building community? And before I let you go on to that, I want to say community. We're living in this society right now where literally the Surgeon General says we have an epidemic of loneliness. One of our local counties here in Northern California is they also declare that for the county. Like, we are breaking relationship. I made the joke the other day, like, we don't have enough friends anymore to be breaking relationship. Like, if you look back to the stats from how many friends on average, people had in 1990 versus 2023, it's a massive difference. So would you guys dig in? That's a lot of preface too. Would you dig into building community and what works for you guys around that?
You talk about the Surgeon General, that whole 80-something page document.
Yeah, there's a book called The Lonely America that says 40% of Americans have 0 to 1 confidant. And you're going, this is a sickness, and it is more dangerous than heart disease. They're saying, because now the increase of depression, suicide. Sociologists are saying the root issue for many people dealing with depression is actually loneliness. It was Japan and in the UK, they hired a minister of loneliness. Like, it is an actual position to try and curb it and going, all right, let's step back. And from a Christian worldview, biblical perspective, Psalm 68 is like the passage where it says, God is a father to the fatherless, defender of widows. He places the lonely in family. Mm-hmm. And God's heart, that leaving the 99 for the one, he is so, cultural Christianity is so enamored with the crowd, and churches get enamored with the crowd. And Jesus was always focused on the one. And to how do we take those isolated, bring them into a sense of community and family? And so I think, we all have our experiences with family. Many of us have pain and baggage around family. The word belonging is a buzzword, but it's a buzzword because it's what everybody's looking for, and phrases like where I can be seen and where I'm known. Those are very real feelings and emotions. So people are going all over anywhere to find that sense of belonging. So I think what we've tried to do is start and say, I have to first believe I belong. Meaning if I don't think I belong, which is about worth and value, and I don't have time to unpack it, but you'll walk into any and every situation waiting to be rejected. Yeah. And we talk about it in the book, but during COVID, we had 3 of our single friends, or 4 of them that are all in their 30s. That were singles, and we sat them at our kitchen table and we said, we've been together since we were 19, got married at 21. What does belonging, what does family look like for a single, in your stage of life? And one of our friends, Peta, said, belonging is not just something that you find, belonging is something that you bring. And that just shifted something for us, where sometimes we're waiting for something to happen for us or to us. And that's great when it does. But I'm imagining people listening going, that's great. I don't have anybody reaching out to me. I don't have anybody inviting me over. And going, maybe one more quick story was, we've kind of touted this as a community. Hey, we're going to be a church that's welcoming and all that. Well, we had this lady in her mid-40s, single, that had been coming for several months. And she sent me an email and said, hey, can we grab coffee? I said, of course. So we go to coffee, and she says, I came for several weeks, and after church, I'd watch everybody. Like, I think if you came, you wouldn't feel like this is a cliquey church. You would feel like, oh my gosh, these people hang out. We can't get them to leave. Like, everybody is connecting, but people find their pockets. People find their people. But point was, she goes, week after week, nobody talked to me. And she goes, so I went back and I prayed. I said, God, what do I do? Now, she could have been like most people and gotten angry and said, forget the church, whatever. She said, I felt like God said, you need to go find the people that feel like you and bring them in. And so she started bringing belonging, even though she didn't have it herself. And then something magical started to happen as this little community started to form around that.
Yeah.
No, that's good. I mean, I think, excuse me, the heart of this book is removing the barriers to building belonging. So I would just say that it's like the story I wrote about in the book, but these group of 14 women, like the day I found I had cancer, I'd been invited into this group, and I'm like, I'm not so sure about this. And it was a risk. So I'm thinking there's risk.
Yeah.
It took a humility on my part. Like, really the only way, excuse me, we have to stick around. Those that stick around and stick in with relationships are those that grow. I have to go, I do not know everything, and I can learn from anyone. And I had to remind myself. So that was like, that was going to be a barrier for me if I didn't. And it was worth the risk. Again, I don't know the outcome, but I know it's worth the risk every time. And so the humility, the honor piece, seeing people for who they are without stumbling over who they're not, has allowed me to continue to build community and relationships in seasons when I'm like, okay, I actually have been so hurt by judgment. I'm really just judging all of you, and you're not safe. So I'm really doing the same thing. We react in the same way we've been hurt more than we realize. It's a subconscious response. Yeah. And so, again, those are the things. I have to take risk. I have to forgive. I mean, we've had some big betrayals in our marriage, and we barely made it past year 2. We wrote about that in the book too. But, there's been a lot of things. I had sexual abuse in my background. There's things that we go through so much hard in life where we're like, but you don't know my story. And I would say, I don't know your story because none of us have the same story. Yeah. Or we go, well, my heart's not as big as yours, so maybe mine's just silly and there's something wrong with me. No, because God is not comparing. There is not a formula. It's just worth it. On the front of our book is this, for those of you that can see, like, there's a mountain on the front of the book. And why we put a mountain on the front of it is because we talk about in the intro that, like, family and building community and belonging is like climbing a mountain. And sometimes I've been up at the top and I've seen the views go, this is worth it, but I have been drop kicked.
Yeah.
I have been knocked down to the bottom. Sometimes I'm like, I'm sitting here at base camp or I'm at this next place because I have to acclimate, but I'm like, it's still worth going up. Yeah. I may not always see that view, but I know it's worth it. And so, yeah, anyway.
Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah. There's so many pieces of that to kind of draw out. I think one for me that stands out as being purposeful and taking the risk to reach out to somebody. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've said to myself, well, they're not calling me. Nobody's calling me. Nobody's texting me. Why is anybody reaching out to me? Yeah. And I can sit in that and then I'll be all by myself, or realize that I'm also not calling anybody. And so pick up the phone and call, text somebody, right? And so I've chosen to just make a list of people that I will go for a walk and I will call. And my rule is like, I will call 3 different people. Hopefully one of them picks up. If they don't, then I guess I'm going to be listening to music or an audiobook. But, they also say that for our health, exercise and community are important. So I'm knocking 2 off at once. I'm doing it during a walk. But my point is being purposeful about it. Yep. And then just calling. And my people are like, what? You're going to call somebody randomly? I'm like, well, it's 12:30 in the afternoon. Either they're available or they're not.
Yeah.
That's right.
And if they're not, that's fine. They won't pick up. If they are, hey, do you have 10 minutes? Sure. And then you chat. Anyway, my point is like, but sometimes it's overcoming our own, like,
our own barriers that we've put up.
Why do I have to reach out? Why do I always have to be the one? And
sounds like victim when we get like that. Yeah. Nobody wants to live as a victim.
Yeah. I'd like to talk a little bit about people being complicated. I'm going to circle back to that again because it keeps coming up in my head. And I think one reason I want to bring that up is because we make most people who don't look like us, think like us, act like us as very flat, right? We make a caricature of whatever we picture, whether it's a political caricature, whether it's an ethnic caricature, not realizing that people are nuanced. So I'd love to circle back around here to that idea of what does complexity look like? And maybe that goes back into the messiness again, but like just that idea that we cannot generalize on people because people are super complex.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard. I think we projected the most, again, back to what I was saying on the judgment piece, is because we are complex. So like human problems, like people equals mess. I mean, that is, and mess, if mess feels like too strong of a word, it's complicated, right? Like we're complicated, and God's not like, oh gosh, you're so complicated. I mean, I said this to Chris the other day. I was thinking as I was reading through one of the Gospels, like, oh man, or you just watch The Chosen. If you've ever seen The Chosen, the disciples were just these young guys who were complicated. Yeah. They were messy. They had tempers. They were like, they didn't get it. They were probably annoying, probably had bad joke. One was, too shy. One talked too much. One was an introvert. One was an extrovert, all this stuff. And like, okay, Jesus, how did you do that? You didn't shut down or walk away because of mess, personalities, family dynamics, sin patterns, whatever. You stepped into it. And so I think that what allows me to be in the complicated parts of people's lives and not abort every time it's like, oh, it's hard, is to self-reflect in my relationship with God and to say, what are you doing in me? And as I have gotten more healed and whole, and I am still growing, I still need a lot of work. I've never arrived. But it allows me to go, oh, I remember God taught me how to be kind to myself in this area. I've got to do that with somebody else. And a phrase that I'd read a long time ago, like on some billboard or something, stop expecting you from other people. And I was like, oh my goodness. And little things that I'm like, oh, I'm really frustrated. And I just want to just back out of this relationship. And I remember the Lord going, because you want them to respond and resolve conflict like you, but just like Chris doesn't, the same as you. And we have to learn. Now, are there relationships and people that were family, maybe not in different seasons, because maybe that they needed to go. We talk about boundaries for sure. But as we are able to like walk with God and whatever that means for you in terms of like getting whole and heal, that could be a whole nother podcast. But as I've chosen to say, I have to keep growing, it has allowed my relationships and my ability to like not perform, not need identity out of people, but yet stay when it's hard and letting other people, because I've learned how to let myself not be perfect.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I think the essence of family is the closer, everybody looks great on an Instagram post or from a stage, but the essence of family is there's a closeness and an intimacy that is revealing. And that's why, the way we get let down is we have unfair expectations of people. The reality is we're all complicated. We're all in formation. And again, the closer you get, it's why the church is like, what do we expect? Do we expect people to be perfect? Or are we, if we start, hey, let's do life together. That sounds so good until you start doing life together. Then it gets messy.
Belonging to others and other people belonging to us is like a lifelong pursuit, and we have family. We talk about this in the book, family goals we imperfectly practice. And the first one is to seek to understand before being understood, which we do that by like trying to really ask intentional questions. Number 2, believing the best about each other, even when we are at our worst. Number 3, having open and honest conversations. Like there's, no BS allowed, right? We call it like true confession. We get to bring, I'm actually feeling angry at you. Remorse is not repentance, right? It's like, so to change the way we think, we actually have to be honest so that when we can have transformations in our relationship with God and with each other. Number 4, working through hard things instead of walking away. And number 5, inviting feedback without defense while giving space for the process. Like it's messy, but it's worth it. So
yeah. All of those are amazing. I mean, and they really are. They're the key to figuring this thing out. They're the key to keeping a relationship going, right? How are we honest with one another? And it's easy for us to hide. It's easy for us to just like, I'm just going to set that aside, pretend like it didn't happen. Yeah. But it does not create the health we're looking for, right? It does not create the healthy community. So, all right, I have one final question for you guys, and we've clearly there's so many trails we could be going down, but I'm going to ask this one final question here, and we'll see where this goes. But what's exciting you guys right now? What project, trend, Bible verse, something happening in your life, your marriage, your church, whatever it is that just excites you guys?
Yeah. Do you want to share that?
Go for it.
Yeah, we have friends that have an organic farm out in Santa Fe, Tennessee, and we did a gathering there a few weeks ago. But we are launching something called Fam to Table instead of Farm to Table. And if you look at research, even up to the 1950s, the dining table was the centerpiece of the American home. It was the place of connection and vulnerability, and it was the centerpiece. The TV came out in the 50s. TV dinners got invented, and then families literally began gathering around the TV instead of the table. And they can even track some of the breakdown of the American home once the TV came out. And this is not a surprise. We have, there's homes being built now where it's literally going, where's the TV going to go? We're going to design everything around it. Or you go to a restaurant and you watch kids with their headphones on,
or just
iPad,
TVs on the wall.
And it's everywhere, right? And so eye contact, asking questions, intentionality, it is a lost art form. But the table is a place of reconciliation. I have a friend who's an attorney, and he sent me a study. I mean, this is a secular thing. And going, if there's two opposing parties, they found that if there's a shared table with a shared plate, whether it's chips or whatever, the two people opposed are taking food from the same plate. It's like an 80% chance higher of a mediation happening. It's a subconscious thing that the table does. So we're excited to launch this movement called Fam to Table and teach people how to invite strangers to the table that can become like friends, and how to have meaningful conversation around the table.
Because you connect over a meal before you're talking about issues. And I mean, maybe someone's like wants to talk about politics or whatever right away, or if their theology, they want to know that. You can't control those things. But we sat at a table here of like 100 people, strangers, didn't know anybody, here in Malibu at this event. And it was so sweet because I'm talking with somebody who I know. Our conversation wasn't about what we believed. It was about how he had a sister that he lost. Like, it gets me emotional, and I've never seen him since then, but like lost his sister to cancer and then something else. We were connecting over the things that bring intimacy in life, And so when we connect over those things, again, I know you're asking a question, but we're passionate about, we're excited about that because it connects us over intimacy. And so then when it's later, we've connected, but it's like, oh, we disagree. That doesn't affect the relationship as much because we've connected over something that's palpable. Is that the right word? Yeah. And just the heart of life. So we're passionate about this thing called Fam to Table, which is nothing new. It's just, let's practice it more.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. That is so good. I mean, I'm going to like give 2, maybe 3 examples by the time I'm done, but like we remodeled our house a few years ago. And before we finished remodeling the house, I found this teak table on Craigslist. It was like, my wife's like, wow, why are you like, okay. So our dining room table was a dining room table that my parents had when I was like born. Okay. Wow. It's a glass top. I literally remember as a child looking through the glass top at my dad and mom. Okay.
Wow, that's cool.
It tells you how old it is. It also tells you how cheap we are because it's like, well, it still works. So we're just going to use it. And I spent $800 on a teak table to go in the backyard. And my wife is like, why our house isn't remodeled. This is going straight to storage. Like, this is not like, we're not using this. Why are you doing this? I'm like, because this is where Thanksgiving dinner, we live in California. And half the time or more on Thanksgiving, we can sit outside.
Yes.
This is where Thanksgiving dinner is going to be. This is where barbecue dinners are going to be. And like, it seats 8 to 10 people and we gather around it. And it's a centerpiece of our backyard. It's just an absolute, it's a gathering place. And just so many fun, amazing, just memories that happen there. The second thing is, this is exactly what we're doing with our cohorts at Live Faith First. So we're building, I haven't talked about this a ton on the podcast, so thank you for giving me just half a second to do this, but we're building cohorts of pastors from diverse backgrounds to build relationships in order to go serve in their communities. And it's for exactly what you're talking about. If we can get people together in the same room around a table, just to build relationship. Once that's established, now when we say, hey, as a group of churches, we want to help the homeless population or we want to serve here, I might disagree with the person across the table with me on how we do it. But you know what? I've already learned to love that person. I've already learned that they are an honorable, respectful, well-meaning, well-thinking person. Sure, let's do it. I wouldn't do it that way, but I want to be with you. And we both think that cause is important. So now let's just trust each other and let's get after it. And if it fails, no problem. I'm not going to point fingers. We're just going to go back and figure a new way. And so that's the same idea of what you guys are doing. So I love that. Is there anywhere people can find resources on that? Or is that just a thing that's launching out? Is there...
There is info on our website.
You can go to fightingforfamily.org. There's a little bit of that if you go to the bottom.
There's a link on it.
There's a link on it. And just not only, you can dig in a little deeper. It just talks about what they are. And So yes, of course, some media projects around family, some things we're excited about. And we got our 2 oldest that moved out. We're excited about that. Full-time tattoo artist. And then our son is a quarterback at Baylor. So one of them.
Wow,
so it's a sweet season. Yeah.
Yeah, that is so cool. Well, Chris, Julie, thank you so much for joining the Live Faith First podcast. I loved our conversation, and I hope we can do this again one day. So
don't get far away from each other. Come to the boo. Come hang.
That would be awesome. I would love that. So, hey, everybody out there today, let's go live faith first.